in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Linda was known for her overzealous attempts to clean up the area, with a loud voice and an inflated sense of authority. She often took it upon herself to enforce her own version of community standards. Linda prided herself on being a neighborhood watch, but many consider her more of a nuisance than a protector. On one fateful day, she spotted James, a new homeowner, unloading boxes from his car. His arrival sparked a wave of anxiety in her. James was black, and in her mind, he was threatening the property values of her precious neighborhood. It didn't matter to her that he was a good man or that he was simply moving into his new home. All that mattered to Linda was her skewed perception of what his presence represented. Fueled by resentment, Linda hatched a plan. She approached him, hoping to intimidate him into realizing that he didn't belong in her neighborhood. "You're not welcome here if you're going to bring down property values," she declared, her voice dripping with contempt. James, taken aback but composed, simply responded, "I'm just moving in." But Linda wasn't finished. In a brazen move, she snatched James's car keys from the hood of his vehicle, convinced that this would send her message loud and clear. As she walked away, she felt a rush of satisfaction, thinking she had successfully asserted her power. A car without keys was just a hunk of metal, and without that car, James would somehow be discouraged from staying. Little did she know that this reckless act would set off a chain reaction, turning her petty act of rebellion into an unraveling of her supposed superiority. As she dialed 911, she thought she was calling for backup, but she was about to face the consequences of her impulsive actions. With a false sense of victimhood, Linda spoke into the 911 dispatcher, her voice shaky yet dramatic. "Hello, I need help. A black man is trying to intimidate me. He's stealing my stuff." By framing herself as a victim, she thought she would easily convince the police that she was in danger. Her heart raced with excitement as she painted James as a criminal in the eyes of the law. However, her heart sank when she saw the flashing lights of police cars pulling up within minutes. Linda had imagined a rescue, but now terror gripped her as the officers stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions focused and serious. They were here to respond to her call, believing they were about to apprehend a suspect. As the officers approached James, who was still patiently waiting beside his car, they quickly assessed the situation. They had come prepared to handle what they assumed was a serious threat. But James did not flinch or engage theatrically. He stood solidly, emanating calm and collected energy. Suddenly, he reached into his pocket and revealed his police badge, flashing it with an air of authority that sent shockwaves through Linda. The officers froze momentarily, their expressions changing from readiness to confusion. They had never expected the man they were sent to apprehend would be one of their own James. Despite the chaos unfolding, he maintained a steady demeanor and spoke with clarity. "I am Chief James Reynolds. I live here." Before Linda could process the turn of events, the officers redirected their attention from her to him. Trying to understand what had just happened, Linda's confidence began to evaporate, replaced by a paralyzing fear. The scene that had been all about her was now shifting dramatically, and she didn't like the new narrative. With police officers now recognizing James and realizing the gravity of the situation, the atmosphere around Linda shifted drastically. The commanding officer turned to her, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "You called 911 on a police chief?" His voice was tinged with skepticism, clearly questioning her authority to make such a claim. Linda looked around frantically, her mind racing. She had always believed that her aggressive behavior would protect her image, but now it felt as if every judgment she made in that moment was crashing down on her. She stammered, "I didn't know he was acting suspicious." James stepped forward, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Suspicious? All I was doing was moving into my home. You took my keys." His tone was firm yet composed, a direct contrast to Linda's erratic demeanor. The police officers exchanged glances, realizing they were dealing with a case of mistaken identity and a serious misuse of emergency services. They faced Linda, who was trying desperately to backtrack. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." But her narrative was unraveling with every attempt to defend herself. James's patience held steady. He explained to the officers how Linda had taken his keys without any reason, her actions driven by prejudice rather than truth. The officers carefully noted everything down, understanding that the real criminal behavior was coming from Linda, not the man she had tried to vilify. In that moment, the tables turned. The authority figures in the situation had evolved from potential oppressors to advocates of justice. Linda's self-proclaimed role as a neighborhood enforcer was quickly slipping away, and soon she would face the consequences of her reckless choices. With the realization that things were not going in her favor, Linda's demeanor shifted from defiance to desperation. Her confidence spiraled into panic as she began to understand the weight of her actions. The officers, now keenly aware of the situation, moving closer to hear her side of the story. "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought—" She stumbled through her words, grasping for any justification. "I thought he was a threat. You know how things are in these neighborhoods." Her tone was laced with desperation, but it only further exposed the underlying prejudices that had led to this moment. One of the officers, clearly unaffected by Linda's excuses, responded firmly, "Your assumptions could have escalated a serious confrontation. You cannot take matters into your own hands like this." The authority in his voice was unmistakable, and Linda felt the weight of judgment press against her. Meanwhile, James stood quietly, allowing Linda's excuses to reveal her character without his intervention. He knew that he didn't need to defend himself further. Her words were doing more harm to her credibility than anything he could say. The commanding officer continued to question her about the incident, wanting to understand the full scope of what had transpired. Linda tried to paint herself as a heroine, but struggled to explain away her reckless actions. "I just wanted to make sure our property values didn't go down," she finally confessed, her voice tinged with a mixture of defensiveness and shame. In that moment, the truth hung heavily in the air. James took this opportunity to explain why her behavior was not just misguided, but harmful. "You took it upon yourself to assume something based purely on color, rather than my character or my actions. Not only is that unjust, but it perpetuates a cycle of discrimination that is deeply damaging." The officers listened intently, their eyes shifting between James's steady resolve and Linda's increasingly frantic attempts to clear her name. The severity of her actions began to loom over her, revealing the depth of her prejudice and the impact it could have had. As Linda's story fell apart, the police officers made it clear that her actions would not be taken lightly. They explained to her that making false claims to law enforcement was a serious offense and could have consequences far beyond her understanding. Linda's face turned pale as they outlined the possibility of charges for theft and misuse of emergency services. In an attempt to save herself, she pleaded with the officers, "Please, I didn't realize who he was. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to call you here." But there was no going back. The gravity of her mistake weighed heavily on her conscience, and the law would operate without pity for her misguided intentions. James, maintaining his dignified stance, addressed the officers. "I don't want to press charges, but I hope this serves as a wake-up call for her." He was not vindictive, but rather focused on fostering understanding and awareness in a community that desperately needed it. Let her learn from this experience, so it can spark conversations about prejudice and accountability. The officers nodded, appreciating James's calm and measured response. They turned back to Linda, who suddenly realized the enormity of what she had almost unleashed upon an innocent man simply because of her bias. They informed her the warning she would receive, emphasizing the importance of community accountability and discouraging her behavior altogether. The fair approach might have satisfied James's desire for justice, while leaving room for Linda to reflect on her actions. As she stood there, Linda's tough facade began to crumble. She understood that her actions had consequences not just for herself but for the community as a whole. Whether she could change her behavior moving forward remained uncertain, but the evening had certainly opened a door for reflection. The incident left a profound impact on all parties involved. Linda, under the weight of her choices, had no way of knowing how much her perception of community would change in the aftermath. As she walked away from the scene, the officers issued her a formal warning, effectively closing the chapter on her misguided enforcement. James, having returned to his home with a newfound sense of purpose, started forming community connections immediately. He organized a neighborhood meeting, hoping to foster an atmosphere of openness and understanding. James wished to engage Linda in constructive dialogue, believing that healing could emerge from the experiences they had both endured. When the meeting day arrived, Linda hesitantly accepted the invitation, feeling compelled to confront the echoes of her actions. Sitting before the community, she shared a heartfelt account of that fateful day, embracing vulnerability for the first time. "I let my fears and biases dictate my actions," she confided, her voice trembling. "I took what I thought was control, but turned it into chaos. I realize now that I was wrong." The room fell silent as people processed her admission. James's voice broke through the stillness. "We're all fallible, and it's important we learn together how to combat these biases. We must acknowledge them, not ignore them." In that moment, the community began discussing how they could support each other better, focusing on collaboration rather than division. Linda, despite her earlier actions, felt a sense of relief in sharing her experience. As the evening unfolded, people began to connect, bridging gaps that once separated them. James and Linda stood together to emphasize the importance of understanding and empathy among neighbors. Though it wasn't a perfect resolution, the seeds of change were planted. With hopeful hearts, the community embraced their lessons. They vowed to become stronger by avoiding prejudice and fostering unity. Linda transformed from a misguided enforcer to an active participant in change. Her journey forward intertwined with understanding and growth. The neighborhood, once divided by assumptions and fear, now had the opportunity to celebrate their differences while collectively working toward a more inclusive future. The incident had flipped the script, igniting a dynamic conversation around prejudice and community that would echo for years to come.